Okay, cool. Hello. How we doing? Good. So I wanted to pick up where we left off on Thursday. So this class is structured in such a way that like when we have the exams in class, some stuff gets really smushed, and senses is something that got really smushed into one day. And so it didn't quite finish even the minimal amount I wanted to talk about. So I wanted to pick us up on senses from Thursday before we get into reproduction for this week. So hopefully this isn't the start of being behind. It's just catching up. So you guys already saw this. This is a nice mammalian phylogeny, placentals, primates. And something that I hope can really stick with you is how weird you are, even as a mammal, because most of the mammals that are alive today, their primary sense for like out in the world, they have good vision, but that vision is limited in its color, and they have really excellent senses of smell. You are a primate, and like some, but not all other primates, you have really good color vision and sort of a relatively bad sense of smell. It's really cool to me because it means that we are very different, not just with the brains, not just with the 2 feet, not just with the hands, but in our sensory perceptions too. We're really different from a lot of other mammals. And so I'm not going to go over this again. We talked about it on Thursday, but it's really cool that it's obviously something that happened in primate evolution as we left the forest and became grassland animals. It's a mutation. If you go back on the slides, looking at the 3 different cones that we have, 2 of them are really close, like the amount of light that they are good at absorbing. It's because it's a mutation of that one. And then it's a little bit of differentiation. So it's very cool. There's like a point mutation that gives us color vision. We have trichromatic vision. Everybody else is tetra. Most mammals are di. We have tri. It's really cool and really weird. And so what we ended with last week was how you and all the other people can see that orange, but the thing you're trying to shoot can't see the orange. And so there's ways that you guys kind of already know about this. Yeah.
Where does the like fourth sense of smell come in? Is that just like a gradual thing that all
Part of it is the flattening of the face of primates. So most sense of smells that are really good, it's almost directly correlated with like the surface area you have available. So if you look inside the skull of a dog or a cat, there's all these thin bones like going like this. Those are called turbinates. It's a huge amount of bony structure with then epithelial cells on top that can like absorb mucousy cells that can absorb scent. There's some covered scent receptors. So it's not like a direct trade-off. Like, oh, if you see color, you can't smell what. It's not that straight of a trade-off. It's just true. So this is where we left off. Yes.
Okay, so the third cone that we is it the same as one of the cones that we lost, or is it?
No, it's one of the 2 that all the other mammals have, and then it's been selected to like have a greater spread. Okay. We can see reds a lot better. It's a red focusing one.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's like we didn't get one back. It's lost. We took one we had, but all like the deer has too, and then it's spread in terms of like the wavelengths they can absorb. It was like selected that way. There's all kinds of cool stuff I want to talk about there, but it probably has to do with us being in the trees and all kinds of cool stuff. But anyway, I want to talk about the animals that go beyond. So tetrachromacy. So here's what I'm talking about. We have this one, and so do all the other mammals, and then we have a mutation where we have another one like that. So these are the spectra that are absorbed really well by our 3 cones. Birds and most of the fishes and most of the reptiles have tetrachromacy 4. So they're huge spread across the visible spectrum, and then for birds into the ultraviolet. We actually know that that's true for a lot of other kinds of animals. And so what that means is ultraviolet light that's reflected off any surface, you just can't see it. Your eyes don't have the receptors to pick up ultraviolet light. Obviously, we have cameras. We can take a picture of something that has an ultraviolet receptor, and then the computer can like assign it a purpley blue color, but we don't actually know, right, what color that is, because those purple blues are the kind of things that you can see. All we know is that something's happening that we can't detect, which is really freaky. And I think one of the things that's inherently frustrating once you know it is that all those birds right now outside in the snow can like see things that you will never see. Flowers under ultraviolet have extra spirals and extra design on them that our eyes cannot see because they're only ultraviolet. Bumblebees can see it, spiders can see it, birds can see it, but we can't see it. I think that's very sad, but it's really interesting, right? So a great example is something like a starling. That's what a starling, this is a kind of starling from Asia Minor. We don't know what color it really looks like to birds, but different parts of its body reflect ultraviolet light in different ways. So it looks like this to you, and in some kind of way, it looks like this to another bird. There's different things happening in these different patches. It's really crazy. So ultraviolet is happening all the time. It's reflected just like other light. It's high energy, but we can't see it. And then somebody over here, I think Addison maybe, brought up last week when we talked about senses, other kinds of light sensing. And so if you go off the visible light spectrum, if you go off the purple end, you go into ultraviolet, right? And if you go off the other end, which is the red end, you go into the infrared. Now this is longer wave radiation. You can detect infrared radiation, like off of a rock, as heat. Like heat is something that you can detect tactilely. But there are some vertebrates, snakes are the most famous example. It's not their eyes, it's not their nose, it's pits they have. You maybe have heard of a pit viper. Vipers have these pits on the edges of their nose that sense infrared radiation. So they're not seeing it with their eyes, but they can sense it. And so we can use cameras again to see infrared radiation as a form of light. And so in the middle of the desert at night, everything's dark and cool, but this mouse, which is hot-blooded, is lit up. Its eye is hotter than its tail. And that pit viper can sit there dead still. Maybe it can see it with its eyes in the moonlight, but it definitely can sense the heat from this structure on the front of its nose that's unlike anything else you have. So ultraviolet and infrared reception are things to think about for how other animals that are absolutely not us can sense things that are true out there in the world. A couple other just kind of fun things in vision that I like to talk about. You guys all know what this is, right? You all probably have pictures, right, from some high school dance or something where everybody looks like they're about to murder everybody else because they have red eyeballs. So that's called the tapetum lucidum. It's a super common structure. All it is on the back of your eyeball, on your retina. So not the front, but along the inside back surface. Different animals have different structures to it. Sharks actually have like crystals of this guanine is what it's called on the back of their eyeball. And this is just something that is an adaptation for low light situations. What little light is out there in the environment passes through your lens into your eye, and then those crystals reflect it back out. So it bounces the light around a little bit so you can get more out of just that little bit of moonlight, that little bit of flashlight, whatever it is. And so tapetum lucidum is that structure, and it's all over the place. Tons of animals have it. Sharks, there's a frog, there's a very scary leopard, owl, someone's nice dog. I'm sure it's a nice dog, but it, got the scary eyes. What I think is really cool is that this structure or things like it have evolved a ton of times convergently again and again and again and again. And just to be clear, it's not just vertebrates. There's a wolf spider. So if you ever go camping in places that have like a lot of wolf spiders, I would encourage you to like go out with your headlamp or something like that at night and just kind of go like this in the grass, because you'll see like 70 pairs of eyes and be like, oh, I shouldn't have. Because that's how you can find spiders at night really easily. If you have a flashlight, go like this in some sagebrush, you'll find the spiders like that because their eyeballs are just mirrors, which is really cool. So that's a low light adaptation. So what's really cool is that you have a lot of cones in your eyes for color vision. You have an okay amount of rods. Rods are the other kind of receptors in the eyeball. They sense light generally. And so like, I actually couldn't really explain it to you, but they're good at like light, no light. And so if you have a lot of rods, you are just like able to see better in the dark. And so things that are nocturnal, things that live in caves, things that live in the deep ocean, their retinas are full of cone cells, rod cells, very few rod receptors, very few cone receptors. So this shark's full of rods in the back of its eye. And actually a lot of sharks, like I've told you already, have like lost most of their cones and don't have color vision at all, even though that was their common ancestor. Other sort of really fun, I think, comparative anatomy adaptations we can see in vision are things like eye placement. Talk to your neighbors for a second about this. What is the deal here?
But they don't.
All right, so can someone give us a rundown here of the general pattern? Yeah, Calvin. So as far as vertebrates go, we got two eyeballs. Other animals do other crazy stuff, but you got two eyeballs. When you overlap the fields of vision, you get depth perception. And so if you have forward-facing eyes, like that cat or that eagle, there's an area of your vision that's binocular. You have really good depth perception. It is something we tend to see in predators. You don't have to have binocular vision to be a predator. There's also plenty of animals that have binocular vision. A lot of monkeys and primates have it, but they're not necessarily predators. They're up in the trees. They still need depth perception. But we associate it with predators. People make jokes all the time, like Furbies are predators, Elmo's a predator because, you know, binocular vision. That's like a fine rule. I do think it's interesting that, like, yeah, like a horse or like a pigeon, these are prey animals that are eating food in the ground. They're eating grass and seeds, and they're going like this all the time because at any moment they're about to get taken out by some other predator. And so having a wide scope of vision isn't like worse. It's a different kind of adaptation, right? You can sense a huge area. That cat can only see right in front. That eel can only see right in front. It has no idea what's behind it. Whereas the horse has much more general awareness. The pigeon has much more general awareness. And so this is an interesting thing we see. It's like it happens again and again and again and again and again. One thing that's funny is like, this is something that like most people pick up on, even if they never put words to it, that like predators, like when the lion like looks at you or whatever, you're like, whoa, or when the eagle looks at you. And I think people make these funny things online where they put the prey's eyes in the predator's eye placement, and you immediately are like, oh yeah, that does look stupid. So if you give the deer wolf eyes, you're like, that's not, I don't like that at all, right? So you knew this already as like a natural thing. Another fun adaptation, there's so many possible things we talk about here, and I'm gonna try to keep it really short, are things like the pupil shape. So the pupil is where like light is actually let in. And so this is a goat, and there's a lot of hoofed animals, hoofed mammals especially, but we see it in lots of like things like birds. You guys probably think of other animals that have other crazy like pupil shapes. But in a lot of these herbivorous mammals that are in open grasslands, their pupils are wide like that, and then when their heads are up, the pupil's like this, and even if they lower their head down, their eye goes like this. So that pupil's always at the horizon, so they can see predators coming. They have a wide scope. They don't care about the sky, and they don't care about the ground right in front of them. They care about that cheetah silhouette or whatever. It's just super cool, right? To have the shape of your pupil be an adaptation for how you let light in, how you detect your environment in a very specific way. You can imagine why this would be selected for in evolution, because you are better to escape predators with this eyeball if you're this taxon, which is really cool. So that's vision. We talked about a lot of the things you guys have, mechanoreception and chemoreception and some radiation reception. We talked about some radiation reception with the ultraviolet and the infrared that we cannot do, which is really a bummer. The other thing that's really important I want to talk about, because so many vertebrates have it and we don't have it at all, you guys brought it up on Thursday, is electroreception. So in water, electricity travels really well. We're terrestrial animals, we're land living animals, we don't have electroreception. Electricity doesn't travel in the air at all, really. Water is a great conductor. So there's a couple kinds of electroreception. Every single chondrichthyon has some kind of electroreception, and it's passive. It's passive. So this is a hammerhead shark. There's the face. You can see the underside. All those little dots are pores. There's the shark's skin here. You have those toothy scales that have enamel and dentin, right? To make the shark scales, those black white scales. And inside each one of those pores is the semiconducting jelly. And it's always there. And as the shark swims around, if there's an electrical signal being given off by any other animal, the movement of our bodies, of our nervous systems, gives off a low-grade electrical signal. That shark, as it's swimming, the jelly picks it up. It's got nerve cells that take it down to the brain. And so animals like this, I won't say too much because people are going to talk about hammerheads for their projects, which I think is great. But all sharks have electroreception. There's these incredible studies where they look at vision, smell, and electroreception in like sharks in tanks, and cover them with glass or put an electrode over here, but there's a dead fish right here. Electricity is the primary driver for shark and ray eating. They look for electrical signals before they look for scent or even vision. You can have an actual inert fish right here that doesn't smell like anything, but it looks like a fish. They'll attack the electrode. So they want electricity. Also, that's when sharks like bump you. If you ever see videos of scuba divers getting like bumped or whatever, it's because the shark's being like, and those are the electroreceptors trying to figure out what's going on. But that's passive. Those are just jelly pores in its face all the time. And if electricity passes by, they sense it. There's also active electroreception in a lot of freshwater fishes. And so what I mean by that is, just like the Earth has a core that spins and creates a magnetic field around the planet, there are fishes that in their cells, they make it up in their head, and then they have another diode kind of thing in their tail, right here in the caudal peduncle, the base of this caudal fin, the muscular part of the caudal fin. It's like a magnet. And these fishes can turn on an electric field that's around their bodies and fully encases their bodies. And then they are able to, with this long sensory nose, follow disturbances in that electric field when they're looking for prey, mostly invertebrates and things like that. So this is a fish that turns on like a field, a magnetic field around itself, and then can find things that disturb that magnetic field. The rock won't, the seaweed won't, the little snail, the little worm will, and then it goes and eats them up. But they turn, then they don't have to have it on all the time. Super crazy, right? The thing that also is really interesting is that monotremes, actual mammals, have retained electroreceptors, not totally like the shark ones, they are passive ones, in their bills. So an echidna, the very tip of its beak, and a platypus, that entire ducky bill has an electrosensory field around it. So platypuses like hunt with electrical awareness too. Of course, they have vision. Of course, they have all these other mammal senses. That's crazy, I think. Electroreception is something that always is happening in water. I'm not going to say anything about this because of time, but the other thing I wanted to let you guys, I put this on here and you can read it if you want to. I encourage you to. Is how insane some animals are at sensing even things like the Earth's magnetic field. And so a lot of animals that migrate, salmon, sea turtles, pigeons, they have the ability to detect the Earth's magnetic field in all kinds of crazy ways. They actually have cells in their bodies full of little bits of metal that will like orient. Maybe they're in the ear of the pigeon, maybe they're in the nose of the trout, they're definitely in the eye of the pigeon in other ways, in the eyes of sea turtles in other ways. I encourage you to check this out if you think it's interesting. Usually these are suites of characters. These trout or salmon that can travel thousands of miles back to the river they were born in, part of that is because they know exactly what their river smells like. But when they're navigating to get even to the coast of Washington, they use the stars, they use the Earth's magnetic field. It's insane. I'm not going to talk about it too much, but the backside of a pigeon's eyeball is up there, and it's full of like little crystals that will like align and make polarized light happen in their eyeballs. It's very insane. I want to talk about reproduction though, so we're going to stop this. Any questions? Okay. We're going to catch up and then not be behind. All right, so now we're in reproduction week. We kind of started yesterday with Dr. Pradhan talking about her fish research. So when I teach this class, I wanted to give you guys that big old anatomical, super high elevation look down, like the vertebrate phylogeny, big characters like turtles have shells, tetrapods have legs, and have you guys get the biodiversity kind of straight. Now we're getting into like the meat of biology. Senses fills in after the exam, but now this is our first week that's like a week. We've got reproduction this week, diet next week, locomotion after that. These really fundamental properties of any organism. And so this is like obviously one of the great icons in the animal world of sexual selection and reproductive anatomy. There is no reason outside of reproduction that this bird looks like this. There is no function that serves besides the ladies love it. And so that is really fantastic. And some of the most beautiful and interesting pieces of animal anatomy, and actually I would say plant anatomy too, because that's what flowers are all about reproduction. And so the point I want to make to you guys is like, reproduction is like the whole thing, the whole reason we're here, the whole why evolution keeps happening. Does anybody know, talk to your neighbors for a second, what these are here? Okay, what are these things? If you don't know, it's definitely fine, but. Yeah, which means, what is it?
They're bacterial mats that just collect a bunch of just gunk that walks into them, and over tons of years, and they fossilize.
Yeah. So these things are not true like rocks, like you think of a rock on the side of a mountain. These are on the top of each one, there's a living colony of bacteria. And part of that bacterial life is eating, waste products, growing, And so these bacteria, as they grow, have like sediment that accumulates on top of them. When the tide comes in, they have their own waste products that binds with that. And to stay alive, they always move up on top of the sediment that covers them. And so we have these things in Australia. Australia is one of the only places in the world you can go and see these giant rocks that are really just like a coral reef made of bacteria, and the bacteria live on the top. Some of the oldest fossils we have of life on this planet are things like that, which is one of these in cross section. And so what you can see right there are the actual layers of like bacterial gunk and like sand that the tide brought in again and again and again and again. My point is that for billions of years, life on this planet has been reproducing. How can I reproduce more? How can I reproduce better? How can I pass my genes on to the next generation? That is like the entire thing that's happening here. And so something, if you start with like, why does that peacock have a 7-foot blue tail that's like very easy for a tiger to grab? Don't think about it like that. If that tail means I have more babies, that's the tail that nature's going to push onto me. So all of this stuff we talk about, there's so much function. We can talk about circulatory system and respiratory systems. We can talk about camouflage. We can talk about sensory structures. We can talk about anything you guys want. Fundamentally, all this is that once life got started, it kept making itself. And as it kept making itself, if you could make yourself a little better, there were more of you. If you could do it a different way and it worked, oh, cool. And then it keeps happening. All of evolution, everything you guys will learn about introbio, everything you can learn about organic evolution, look at the definition of evolution. Heritable, that means having babies. Successive generations, the next generation. All of this crazy cool stuff, all these adaptations, ultimately are in service of making another copy of yourself. Well, that goes on and does what you do. I really think it's fun to like take it that far back. And there's all kinds of adaptations. There's all kinds of important things that sunflower does, that stegosaurus does, that crab does, but they're all under that same pressure. I don't know why I watch like a crab like that, but they're all under that same pressure to do that. So talk to each other here for a minute. In what ways, not just vertebrates, in what ways can organisms reproduce themselves? Talk about that, please, for a second.
I think there's 6 of them. Smash a lot of that money is in a forum for people making lives. Sexual relations, sort of
All right, so what are some ways organisms can reproduce themselves?
Binary fission.
What's that? Binary fission, what does that mean?
Splitting 2 cells for one.
So just like splitting in some way. So you said binary fission, that's like bacteria, right? So bacteria can do a thing where they split themselves, like there's one bacterium and then it replicates its little genome and then it goes, and then there's 2 bacteria. What other things?
Sexual reproduction.
What is sexual reproduction?
Where meiosis occurs and forms gametes that then combine and produce a recombined like organism.
So you take like half your genome, basically, one copy of all your stuff, and you meet somebody you like, or maybe you don't like, and you trade, and they get one copy, and there's a completely new life form that's got bits of both of you genetically. Okay, anything else people talking about?
Yeah, like budding, so like sponges and stuff, don't they kind of so back the guy and just pick him up? I'm not sure exactly.
So a bacterium or a single cell animal, a lot of like the eukaryotes that are single cell, they don't do, we wouldn't call it binary fission in one of them, but this is sort of a splitting of a single cell. And then so even like a big animal can like bud, so splitting themselves. You're talking about something like a sponge might do. Or you guys probably know, like there's some animals, like if I cut this a piece off, or if I cut it in half, it'll like grow another part of itself. That's not as crazy as you think it is. Like it's not true that if you like cut a starfish's arm off, that starfish grows an arm and then that arm grows the starfish. It doesn't matter. But the starfish can't replace its arm. But there are things like sponges where you can like cut off pieces of them and they're still alive and maybe they'll grow and fill and you'll have two sponges. So the important thing here, you guys said some stuff that I wanted to hear, so thank you. The important thing here is like there's two really big phenomena here, and we usually think of them as like, you know, the two things, when really this is the ancestral condition and then this is the derived condition. Sexual evolution evolved, sexual reproduction, I'm sorry, evolved like in eukaryotes. But this asexual thing, which is driven by mitosis, so just like we said with the cell splitting, you have your genome in your single cell, you make a copy of it, you split into two, and everybody gets a copy. Now there's two daughter cells where there was one before, but they're genetically identical. Whereas in sexual reproduction, two individuals that have their own kinds of chromosomes split their chromosomes up into gametes, and they can put those gametes together in all kinds of ways to make, yes, to make.
Is sexual reproduction, like a synaptomorph eukaryotes, or is
It's
that?
not at eukaryotes, it's a much more of a mess than that.
It's like, so
Yeah, animal sexual reproduction is an ancient snapomorphy of some part of animal, yeah. But it's not exactly, it's not like there's like tick on the tree that like plants and fungi and animals all have, I don't think. It's a mess. I actually think the answer is we don't actually know the truth yet, because the tree is brand new still. And so getting two cells from one, they're just genetically the same. Getting two cells from two different individuals, making a new kind of thing that's a combination of their genetic information. You guys know this, I'm sure. So now a more interesting question. Here's an Adarian, so a little thing called a hydra related to like corals. Here's one budding off, like AJ said. So this is like a budding of this one. It'll pop off and then be its own little organism, own little animal. And then here's some ospreys, some fish-eating raptors raising their little chicks together. So talk to each other, please. What are the selective benefits of each strategy? What conditions out in the world are going to allow natural selection to favor each one? Why don't you guys do this one first? What are the selective benefits of each one of these kinds of reproduction, sexual or asexual?
Yeah. I think she get that. And then with I say the genetic diversity, like big order is a lot of and also the bad experience. Whereas like the tigers, that's about it goes.
Right.
It's not like a fire. I think it's right. The biggest one is like all creating. And you have twice the likelihood.
All right, so can somebody from the group help us out here with this? What are some benefits that natural selection can act on for these different strategies?
Genetic diversity.
Help me out.
On the second reproduction side.
So what do you mean by that?
So by getting some of mom's genes and some of dad's genes, you have a mixture, okay, that can be beneficial. But on the other side, just a direct copy of the adult, if the adult isn't able to fight on disease or something, then the child also will be able to do.
So the genetic diversity, in general, might, as an idea, genetic diversity might give you some new traits, new adaptations. Interesting. What other things we talk about? Yeah, Kevin.
For asexual reproducers, you don't necessarily find a.
You know what? And then you go, bonk. So asexual reproduction is like, straightforward. Cool. What other things did you guys talk about? Yeah.
Asexual reproduction is like really stable over long periods of time. So if it's not a body plan or something that needs to change, then we'll like use that as is. If selective pressure don't kill it first.
Is that not true for sexual reproduction though?
Yeah.
So in general, if there's not a force acting on organisms, or populations, what I really should say, if there's not a force acting on populations, like stasis is pretty common in nature, where like through time or, across space, animals, plants, whatever they are, don't like just evolve new stuff because there's usually a kind of a pressure going on. What other things people talk about? Yeah.
This is something that kind of goes along with sexual reproduction, like childbearing,
Okay.
or like the care of young.
Okay.
That's something that asexual reproduction doesn't tend to favor or have a part of. At least in the case of that.
Higher investment. I don't know about that. I'm going to show you a couple pretty ridiculous scenarios where that's not true. So anyway, you guys got to the really important thing I think here, which is that sexual reproduction gives you new genotypes that natural selection can then act on. The genotype of every baby that's just a clone of its mother is the same genotype that the mother had, or I guess the father had. I don't know if we really say that for asexually reproducing organisms. The parent had. Whereas in sexual reproduction, there's suddenly a new genotype on the landscape that maybe will be affected differently by some selective pressure. So there's higher genetic diversity for sure amongst sexually reproducing organisms. What are the conditions that would allow this or that to be favored relative to the other? Talk about that for a second. To be clear, there's no scenario out there where like all of a sudden ospreys are like, oh, asexual reproduction is going to be favored and they do that. That's not what we're talking about. Just as a general idea, thinking about genetic diversity, what conditions are going to allow one to be pushed for more beneficial?
Obviously, we'll play with small. I think for the
Yeah.
All right, let me hear from somebody who hasn't spoken up yet today. What are some things about asexual? Yeah, Franny.
So for asexual, you need to have a good environment, so for example, for bacteria, a nutrient-full environment, so that they can actually reproduce. Asexual.
So Cass was kind of getting at this a second ago. A really stable environment with like whatever your requirements might be, nutrient requirements, temperature requirements, whatever. If you have a stable environment, like the bottom of the ocean off the coast of North America, this is 5,000 feet down, there's mud for hundreds of miles. If you're just a bacterium, you can just be like, and if you can just fill that whole space, An unchanging, stable environment can be filled by asexually reproducing organisms incredibly quickly. They can really, really, really fill space. Okay, they can be successful, they can be everywhere. What about the conditions that would allow sexual selection to be favored? You can think of it as.
So I guess we can kind of think of it oppositely, like an environment that's constantly changing, might be more complex to.
The same thing happens when we do asexual reproduction, like with our crops, when like we have like a corn strain that we love, and then almost all of Iowa is covered with like a monoculture of the same genotype of corn. If that disease comes through, you can lose everything really quickly. And so genetic diversity can be, it's more adaptable in general. Mutation, mistakes, that's where all new genetic stuff comes from. Most of the time they don't do anything. Sometimes they're really bad for the organism. Very rarely are they something that's like adaptive, but that does happen. And all genetic diversity ultimately starts as mutation, and every single sexually reproducing individual is making gametes where there's maybe mistakes happening while gametes are being made in the reproductive process. If you have it happening in arm skin cells, which you do, usually nothing happens, it doesn't matter. Maybe it's cancer, but usually nothing's happening. If it happens in your sperm or the egg that you might be making, and you give it to your child, that's like a new mutation that's being put on into the next generation. So there's a ton of what we can think of as this big idea of like adaptability, this rich gene pool full of genetic diversity. Evolution can then act. You're not like ready for disease, but when disease comes, there's 1,500 genomes in this population instead of 3. Does that make sense? So neither one of these are like bad or good in some ultimate way, but you can see how in different situations that ones are favored. Do we have any questions or things we can talk about this? Absolutely, I think it is true to think of it as like asexual reproduction is the like ancestral state for life. But I want to be clear that even bacteria do have trading of genetic information. Bacteria do give each other plasmids from their little genomes. So there is sexual reproduction of some kind happening of most kinds of life. Not always just like something simple. Hydras definitely have sexual reproduction too. Okay, let's talk about some fun brain benders. Because now we're getting back into vertebrates only. So I just like to emphasize how life, Ian Malcolm, life's going to find a way. There's always going to be an asterisk next to everything you read about. In animals, this happens. There's always going to be an asterisk. So this is the mangrove killifish, the tiny little fish. This is a self-fertilizing hermaphrodite fish. This fish has gonads that produce sperm. This fish has gonads that produce eggs inside the same individual. They do mate with each other and they produce babies sexually. They also can use their own sperm with their own egg and effectively make a recombined, but still it's just their original gene pool, genotype clone baby that they made asexually with their own sperm and their own egg. So this is a fully actinopterygian, osteichthyon, gnathostome vertebrate that has the ability to self-fertilize and make viable offspring. So it's a very fancy way of making a clone, but still almost like a clone. Anybody know what this is? What if you say it again?
It's basically cloning.
So parthenogenesis is when a female organism can just like have one of her eggs. I think she combines 2 eggs together, but it's very different in different organisms. And then the baby then has a full vertebrate 2N genome, and the mother lays the egg or has the baby, whatever it is, and that baby is effectively her clone. Parthenogenesis is something that's all over the place in vertebrates. Usually we find out about it because nature, that would be so hard to like follow this fish for 3 years and know that she did that. But in aquariums and zoos, when all of a sudden there's an extra thing in the tank, everyone's like, oh, and then they do a test. So there's all kinds of examples from aquariums, zebra sharks, which are related to things like whale sharks and nurse sharks, bonnet heads, which is a kind of hammerhead, they parthenogenically reproduce. If they're in that tank long enough with no boys all by themselves, after a while, they're like, you know what? And they pop out almost basically, yes, a clone via parthenogenesis. A lot of reptiles do the same thing. These are 3 kinds of squamates, copperheads. Komodo dragons have done it in the zoo. I think the Brooklyn Zoo had a Komodo dragon. She laid eggs and they're like, And then she cared for them, she built the nest, she raised them. That's why I put this little asterisk here for higher investment, because there are asexually reproducing lizards and things like that that do have good parental care, and maybe she will parthenogenically lay eggs. And so this baby Komodo dragon is gonna get taken care of just like its sexually reproduced cousin was, but that was not made with sexual reproduction, which is really sort of wild to think about, right?
So in those cases, they would only produce female offspring, right?
Mhm.
So they can't continue the species, but they can.
They can-
Well,
Right. But
if you left that aquarium running for 500 years, I think that you're gonna keep,
Right, but there's no genetic diversity introduced by it.
except for mutation in the individual in gamete cells. So she's still making eggs. So kind of, but you can imagine like the burn of like a graph over time of like novel mutation, and a sexually reproducing population is gonna go like this. And in that aquarium with those 3 sharks is gonna go very low,
So
but still it's gonna accumulate mutations.
that's what we know that this part is all offspring would have.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. And there's frogs too that can do this, that can lay eggs and then take care of them. And so the point I want you guys to take away is like, these are like tetrapods, amniotes even. It's not just like, oh, some crazy sharks. Yeah.
I think with parthenogenesis, there is also some recombinant DNA or just recombination because every egg cell is only part of, like, they're all one end. So they don't have the same chromosomes. So they kind of have different genomes, but it all has to be different.
They have, if you read and this doesn't make sense to say this, but like chromosome 1 to chromosome whatever that lizard has, 17 or 32. If you read it all as like GTCA, the daughters are going to be different from the mother because they are going to maybe have well, no, I don't know why they would be.
You could have like, if it's a heterozygous mother, she could have 2 recessive egg cells.
Oh, right, that's right. And if she gives one of the babies, then could have that and wouldn't have, right. That is the answer. Does everybody get that?
There's
I always get like this when I start talking about 2N, 1N.
definitely some species of lizards that produce almost entirely through parthenogenesis, and every single individual of the species is female.
Yeah, that's true. There are, so that's the thing, we're out in nature, every single one you catch with your net is a female lizard. Which is very insane, but it absolutely is something that happened. Asexual reproduction is not for bacteria and weird coral relatives. These are all vertebrates that can do it in very different ways. I think this one is so fun. Full on, make your own sperm and your own egg, and you just go. That's amazing to me for like a full-on vertebrate like a fish. Okay, we're gonna talk about our stuff here for a second. So just to be clear, this is an anatomy class. We have to like, can't just all show you cool biodiversity all the time. And so across vertebrates, there are gonads is like the general term we would use for like any gamete producing cells. The female gonad produces the female gamete, these eggs, ovum producing organs is what we would call them in this day and age, come out of the ovaries. Obviously, this is the human reproductive system. There's all kinds of things happening here that are, some of these things that you can see are human specific, primate specific, mammal specific, all kinds of stuff happening. What I want you to take from this slide, just in case you didn't have it already, is testes are the sperm producing organs, which is the male gamete. Ovaries are the ovum producing organs, which is the female gamete. And there they are in our bodies. I wanted to talk about a couple really, I think, very cool and interesting human evolutionary situations when it comes to gonads and genitals, especially. So this is what I was talking about yesterday when I asked Dr. Pradhan that question. This is what you're seeing up top is an undifferentiated like human embryo. And so the green there is this little gonad, and there's color-coded tubes, pink and blue, that are present in that early embryo. This is of a person. And so if the development continues relatively uninterrupted, you're going to get this female phenotype where the male-ish tubes kind of fall away. The gonad forms into this ovary with accessory tissues, fuses onto this, which is going to become the fallopian tube down to the uterus. The bladder and the kidneys are very associated with this process. They're on this diagram. And then the bladder tucks in here. and attaches in the embryo. This is still when a person be in the womb, into down in the same urogenital sinus. So like this undifferentiated external surface of this female baby, have the urinary bladder attaching right there. What I asked Dr. Pradat about is there is like hormonal signal that babies that have a Y chromosome would usually have, where this gets interrupted, and instead these pink tubes, which are the things that would become a uterus, would become a fallopian tube, they're the ones that go away. And then these blue tubes attached to the same gonad, there's still vestiges on a testes and down here near the prostate of the female structures, what you could think of as the female structures in a male embryo. And you get then the same structure with the urinary bladder fusing on. Of course, something some of you in this room are very aware of is that in the female embryo, ultimately the urinary bladder, the urinary tract and the reproductive tract separate. Whereas in male mammals, this is placental mammals overall. This is a human diagram, but this is true for all placental mammals. In the male embryo, the urogenital and the genital and the urinary tract stay met inside the body, and there's only one exit for a male for urinary and reproductive purposes. So there's this really awesome thing that happens where like you basically take a turn to make yourself into a male phenotype baby. The same thing is true for the external genitalia. I think this is like super incredible. So a fetus of a baby that's only 6 or so weeks old has reproductive tissues that are still forming. And I just think like as a person, it's incredible to know the developmental, so not evolutionary, developmental homologies that exist between what we would call the male and the female external reproductive organs. And so things like the head of the penis and the clitoris are the same structure. Things like the outside of the penis and actually the scrotum are homologous with the outer labia. These are just things I think are inherently interesting. If you don't think those are interesting, I don't know what to say. But that is like how we can develop on the outside versus on the inside. And of course, you guys know that there's all kinds of ways that this can go. And so the diversity of like human reproductive identity and reproductive ability is all going through these filters of these different structures that are deeply homologous. I'm showing you this because there's one story in comparative anatomy that I think is really interesting. So in every vertebrate you can probably think of, except for some of you probably sitting in this room, your gonads are inside your body cavity. Sharks, fish, snakes, birds, turtles, most mammals even. The testicles are inside the body cavity, and they remain associated usually with the kidneys. They're all part of the same urinary reproductive structure. So that elephant bull has an exit for those two organ systems, but the actual kidney and the actual testes in an elephant are way up in the body. And that's true for most vertebrate diversity. What you guys probably know is that primates are one of these groups that are sort of weird. Male primates, or at least primates that have testes, those testes descend from their place near the kidney. And so between 3 and 6 months, a newborn baby that has this male phenotype is going to have the testes exit the body cavity and descend down into this external structure called the scrotum. And so the scrotum is something that we think of as something that's kind of around because you see it maybe on like a dog, you see it on like a moose or something like that. There's other animals that have a scrotum. Bats do, a lot of carnivorids do, tons of artiodactyls do, but these are all potentially independent evolutions of this structure. That's the weird thing. Did we know or have heard any reasons why people and other mammals have external gonads in the males? I'm seeing some people going, yeah, as in,
What I heard was it was for like temperature regulation, but like the sperm wants it lower temperature than like the rest of your animal body, but I don't know if that's true or not.
so what it is it's possible. So mammals run hot. We're going to talk about physiology later. We're homeothermic. Sperm production can be optimized at a slightly lower temperature than we keep our bodies. So it is true that if you have your gonad, that the one that makes sperm anyway, outside the body, it can be slightly more efficient at making that sperm. That's absolutely a thing. That is true. I'm trying to remember, there's one other, anybody know anything else they've heard? This is kind of some classic pop size stuff, right? The flip side to what I showed you on the other slide, I don't know if you guys remember, there was a book like, why do men have nipples because they don't breastfeed. And like, that's the same answer as like that, all embryos start off as female and then turn male. So like men retain nipples, male elephants retain nipples from when they were embryos. So anything else for why? There's another reason, and I'm just blanking on it right now, that is a good explanation for why. The temperature thing.
Yeah, that's what I was.
Anybody who owns a set of these know that they move themselves around. They have temperature awareness. When it's cold or when it's hot, they move away or towards your body. That's something that definitely happens. So what's really interesting to me about this is that just like you guys have a split here in your throat that goes to your stomach and goes to your lungs, your foregut diverticulum. And so someday you might choke to death because your windpipe and your food pipe are the same pipe. It makes sense in a fish. It's not great in you living on land. This is another great example of this. The body wall where all your organs are is very reinforced with all kinds of fascia and muscles. You don't leak, except sometimes. And so men and a lot of other male animals can get these terrible things called hernias. Because when this guy, or if you ever had a hernia, and when this person was in the embryo, and then an early infant, the testicle left the body, passed through a tiny little hole down into the scrotum. And that hole is then a weak spot forever on the body wall of that individual. So every person who has testicles that have descended has a weak spot on their body wall where maybe someday they're going to try to lift a piano and a little bit of their intestines are going to pop down into their scrotum. That's terrible. And some of you are biomedical or maybe medical people. And I just think it's amazing that like hernias don't exist for like elephants or whale sharks, but they do exist for these temperature controlled gonads that we think are so cool. I really like the trade-off this is, because this is one of those examples you can think of as if producing more sperm more efficiently is something that you can do if you have male gonads descended into a scrotum. Great. Can anybody aware of any like negative pieces of having your gonads on the outside of your body? A hernia. And every single movie you've ever seen that's like, you know, for teenagers where it's like sponged, right? This is extremely vulnerable, I cropped that by the way, extremely like delicate. So it's like, that's a great example of a trade-off. It must be worth it. Anyway, I just think this is one of these great stories of our evolution. A shark's testicle completely makes sense right next to the kidney, no worries. Ours, why don't I put it out in a bag, a sensitive bag? Okay. All right. I want to talk about some sexual stuff now, sexual reproduction stuff now. So here's simultaneous hermaphrodites. So this is an animal, this hamlet, that has egg-producing gonad and sperm-producing gonad in its body. Unlike the killifish, it cannot self-fertilize. You can't put your own sperm with your own egg, but you can meet another hamlet that you like, and you give them some sperm and they give you some sperm, and then you both have your eggs and you reproduce together. So it's still sexual reproduction, but you have the ability to produce both gametes. That's crazy. Something Dr. Pradhan talked about yesterday was a couple instances of sequential hermaphrodites. Usually these are fishes. There's no sequential hermaphrodites I know that aren't actinopterigians that have social structure. So here's that blue-headed wrasse she talked about yesterday. Here's a bunch of juvenile and female wrasses. And so in that system, once you reach adulthood, you're either a male or a female blue-headed wrasse. But in your society, in your little group, one of you is going to be the big male who actually is the one that usually does a lot of the fertilizing of eggs. And a female or a male of this color could become the big blue-head male at any time when he gets eaten or dead or whatever, or leaves. In clownfishes, it's the same way. The biggest fish in the anemone is the big female who lays all the eggs, and the second fish is a male who fertilizes the eggs, and everybody else just lives there. So she didn't quite finish the thing yesterday, but that is true. Like when the barracuda kills Nemo's mom, Marlin is supposed to become a female and Nemo is supposed to become an adult male, and then they're supposed to make babies together, which they didn't do that, but I would have thought that was great. Probably too harsh of a lesson in biology to have Nemo and Marlin become a mated pair. But that is what would happen in clownfishes. And then you guys heard about some serial hermaphrodites yesterday in those blue-banded gobies. This is a much rarer reproductive structure. There's tons of damselfish with this structure. There's a ton of wrasses with this kind of structure. These gobies are very interesting. And you can see it takes, you saw in her slides yesterday, it takes weeks, months, hundreds of days to go back and forth. So these fishes aren't transitioning, but they're like back and forth easily and quickly, but they can go back and forth a few times in their life, depending again on social conditioning, which is really interesting. Yeah.
Do you know about like in fish like barramundi, where I believe they start out male and then as they hit a certain size, they become female? Is that reversible or is that a one-way street?
No, I think that's one way. And there's a few wrasses that do that too, where the females are the biggest fish and they lay huge amounts of eggs, and anybody in the population, it's not social, it's a body size thing. As you grow up, you spend your you can think of it as like you're like a non-reproductive fish, and then you reach sexual maturity and all you do is make sperm. And if you live long enough to get huge, you start making eggs. And so that's like an arc of your reproductive life in some fishes, which again, like I love this because we have an idea of what happens, and like that is what happens in our species. Other species do all kinds of really different things. So getting into like sexual selection here. So not just like sexual reproduction, but like the actual forces, the drivers of different kinds of anatomy, different kinds of behaviors, not necessarily among different species, different clades, but even between the sexes. A male and a female, an egg producing and a sperm producing member of the same species. If you make this gamete or you make a bunch of these gametes, just in general, biologically, getting your genes into the next generation, what are the conflicts that exist between these two gamete producing individuals? Okay, talk to each other.
Well, I guess I don't know. It's okay. I think well, then. Yeah, but it's a lot of like, so it's like things that go, when they're honest. And so, I mean, yeah, they get rid of it. And also a child from the shower.
All right, so what are some of the conflicts? What are some of the pressures that exist in any sexually reproducing species within itself? I heard a lot of good stuff. So I'm doing this anything yet, maybe.
We talked a lot about investment. Female only have like one egg, so they invest a whole bunch, and male like make thousands of sperm and are pretty much ready to go all the time.
Oh no, this is a joke. I'm not. So you have just one gamete, you're trying to turn into a baby, you have thousands, you're like, whatever, it takes time. Okay, what else? So this is like, maybe we can think of it as like the investment, and this is on the gamete level. Are there other kinds of investment differences?
Just gestation is a pretty important thing that happens. And it can put the baby, if you make the baby and the mother very vulnerable to all kinds of problems.
The baby and the asterisk usually mother. So gestation, carrying the baby in any way. Yeah, that's a conflict that exists. What else? Yeah.
You want to make sure after you put all that work in and your offspring is like viable.
So like whatever it means to raise whatever you are. This is inherently interesting, right? Because both, you have to think about this in like the way selection is going to work is like beyond like, any like lifespan, right? It's over the course of millennia. And this is one of the most ancient conflicts in all of life because sexual reproduction has been around for a very long time. Both, you want to think of them as the parents, both parents want to give as little as they possibly can to any one individual offspring, so they can have other ones. But they have to give enough that lives and has babies of its own. And so that tension of how little can I do, even though that feels sad to think about, is the driver that, like, once you have that pattern in mind, you're like, oh, that's definitely why this is like this and this is like this. And it explains other patterns that actually you might say subjectively are like nice patterns. Also can be explained by that same pressure. What's the least amount I can do? What's the most amount of babies I can have? And I need to cooperate. This is a very much an enforced cooperation. You can't do it on your own. You can kind of actually sometimes do it on your own, but not on evolutionary timescales. So interesting. You guys are talking about these conflicts potentially between the egg producing and the sperm producing parent. There's also conflicts in a system like this, conflicts between sperm producing individuals. So this kind of conflict, this kind of conflict that might exist. These are going to be different from each other, right? Between individuals that are having babies with their egg, individuals that are having babies with their sperm. This is a great overarching framework to understand so much animal behavior, so much animal anatomy. Let's talk about probably one of the great examples. So here's a beach in Antarctica full of elephant seals. Tons and tons and tons of elephant seals. A lot of females, big old dude there in the middle with the inflatable nose, making loud noises and flopping all around. What you're looking at here is a graph. Number of seals successfully reproducing, number of weaned pups. So that pup doesn't drink milk anymore, it goes in the ocean and catches its own food. The male line, the female line, actual data of a real giant elephant seal population in Antarctica. Interpret this graph, please, of reproductive success amongst all these elephant seals.
It's like there's the one above the one behind. Yeah, that's very, very right. Yeah, that's the same moment.
Yeah, there's other like.
Yeah.
So they.
And it's so it's like overnight. It's good. One.
How long, like, did they?
I think annually. This is multiple years of data. This, that makes a difference too. Yeah. I'm pretty sure like any mammal, like they can get lucky. They can have twins, but usually. All right, what's some interpretation here? What's some interpretation here for this graph? There's a lot of things we could talk about. Somebody who hasn't said anything yet. Yes.
Okay, so the way we were interpreting it is that pretty much the males who are the most successful are very successful and they're the only successful ones. So there's probably about like only 10 males even fathering every.
Over all these years, there's only 10 males that ever have a baby. This one has maybe one or two, and then go ahead.
And then the males have a bunch of babies and 10 of them, and then the females each just had a couple over the course of the year.
over these couple of years? What other things people add to that? What other people say to that? Pretend that you goes to sleep tonight and you wake up and you find yourself, uh-oh, you're being born again as a seal. Would you like to be a female elephant seal or a male elephant seal, and why? And all you care about is having babies. You're not freaked out when you're like, what would you rather be in this reproductive scheme? This is a very different reproductive pattern than human.
Yeah.
So good.
Like it's not to be.
I mean, if you could be the big competitive male, it'd pay off to be him, but
If you-
like, if you're gonna be an average.
Is it easy to be him? You do get to have just a ton of sex and you have tons of babies. That is true. But your life is violent and insane. There are tens of males in this data sheet that you can't see because they're going like this. And these are the males that are like, and they just eat shellfish all day and sit on the beach, but they don't have any children of their own. If you want to have children of your own and you're a male, very high cost. Whereas females, you're going to be able to reproduce. It's going to be with that guy, but you're going to be able to reproduce. And maybe some of you will have a pup every single year of the whole study and have 10 whole pups for 10 years. That's incredible. So think about these like two things, these very different trade-offs. That male seal is constantly fighting because there's 60 other guys who come out of the surf and want to be him. So his life is all about conflict. They are scarred. These animals are tremendously huge. I wish I could show you how big they are. They may know how big they are. Have you ever seen this before? I would be like this tall. Like when they're reared up like this, they're 8 feet. And so then the rest of their body goes like this. Like these are huge seals. So they get in these fights all the time. It takes a lot of cost. The fitness cost of being that male is insane. The females don't get mate choice, right? They come out on the beach, it's his beach, that's the deal. Maybe in this species reproductive scheme, that's what you want, because maybe your baby is going to be like you, a female, or maybe it'll be a male, and you want him to be the dad because then your baby boy needs to be like that to be successful. This is a pretty harsh system. This is a pretty extreme trade-off between male and female reproductive success. Most females being successful reproductively, most males absolutely not being successful reproductively. What's some differences you can observe between female and male elephant seals here on this beach?
One isn't being killed by another.
Males do kill females and pups on accident all the time because they're so huge and they don't care and they just go wherever they want, which is a real nightmare. But what else? Yeah, so what is sexual dimorphism?
Differences in males and females, like bodies, plans, usually.
So every species usually has, it might be the tiniest little thing, it might be substantially crazy, dimorphism between the sexes. Elephant seals are a great example of body size dimorphism. His body's not particularly different from hers, but he's like 4, 5, 6, 7 times heavier sometimes than she is, because he's got to own the beach. Same species, but they're crazy different in body size. That's really, really interesting. What I think is cool is you see that kind of dimorphism, and dimorphism could mean anything. Antlers on the boys and not on the girls for deer, that's a dimorphic feature. Dimorphism isn't happening in body size. It means any split that's usually along the sex lines. And so body size dimorphism is a big thing we can see in elephant seals, but something that usually makes people sitting in their homes go, oh my gosh, is the fact that like the other is also true. So if you have a reproductive scheme in your species where there's high investment for 1 or 2 babies every year or every couple of years, and the pair is mated, because the best way to make a successful version of an albatross or a gibbon is for both of you to be really involved. So if one of you isn't, it's not as likely to work. That baby's not as likely to make it. So in something like an albatross or in something like a gibbon, body size, even color might be totally muted and you don't know. There's not a lot of dimorphism. So it's not perfect, but dimorphism is this thing where like the more we see it, the more you can kind of pick up on those conflicts in reproduction. The more similar they are, the more there is like a cooperative nature to the baby raising, which is again, I think inherently beautiful and inherently cool. But this is being driven by the fact that this little chick needs seafood every day and you have to fly for hundreds of miles to get it. So you both need to do it or it's not going to work. So you're both in it. All right, we have a little bit of time. Let's talk about some other conflicts in sexual reproduction. Besides the conflict that might exist between egg and sperm producing parents, there's also just conflicts that arise from any structure where there's those different kinds of gametes. So male versus male is something that you guys know a lot about. This is something where, again, sorry to say, so many of the very cool things about animals come from this conflict in their anatomy. Intimidation and violence. Anybody know this bird? Anybody wants like it? Yes. Anyone been screamed at by this bird or attacked by this bird? I have. You probably have. They live here. They're extremely territorial. He's black with these red epaulets on his wings. She's a brown. She'll attack you too, but only when she has eggs. When she doesn't have eggs, she doesn't care. He'll attack you all the time. So territory defending, he's got to put time, effort, energy away from eating because he has to sit there and scream all the time at all the other males to keep them out of his territory. Intimidation. But of course, intimidation rarely works and males are trying to reproduce. So most vertebrates have some system of violence within their group. Anatomical adaptations exist. Horns are a very common thing you'll see. A lot of people associate things like horns and spikes with like predators. Most of the time, those features have to do with intra-specific issues. So bison versus bison, not bison versus bear. So fighting each other, defending territories, defending harems. Some of these animals are extremely social and all year round, it's no big deal. But then it's mating season and everybody gets angry and you have to establish some kind of hierarchy using your anatomy to do it. Bullfrog fight is amazing. Grunts, male grunts have like reinforced like lips, that mobile premaxilla, and then they just sit there and they go like this open mouth and just try to push each other off the reef. Really cool, right? So you guys are aware of things like this. Any comments? I really think the frog picture is really fantastic. I also think the chameleon on the left is in a bad spot. It shouldn't be turned like that. Anyway.
I love the eyes and mouth, bison. Yeah,
So this is male versus male competition. This is usually the default. Most vertebrate systems, because females are going to produce an egg, and that egg is almost certainly going to be, if the system that that species is in falls through itself, once the female's egg is fertilized and she does what she can, aside from bad luck, she'll probably reproduce. So there's a lot more of the intrasexual competition amongst males, but that's not always the default situation. There are some species where the females are the ones that fight each other. And so phalaropes are a kind of bird up in the Arctic. He is this one, and those are two females. This is a rare case in birds where the females are brighter colored and they show off for him and they fight each other and he gets to watch. And then one of them will be the one that he fertilizes the egg for. In some of these birds, but not all of them, he's then the one that watches the eggs and she's like, and leaves. There's a lot of birds that do that kind of thing where the male watches the eggs. But in this case, the females actually fight each other to be his mate, which is very opposite we expect from the gamete investment angle. But from the parental care angle, he's going to take care of the eggs. So they'll fight for that. Interesting. You guys probably know this example, yes? What is this example?
Yeah, well, I think they just
So these are fishes. These are actinopterygian fishes. She will lay her eggs in a pouch on his front. This is not, actually, wait a minute. Yeah, we have time, I'll tell you. He has a special pouch on the front of his body where he can like keep those eggs that are fertilized, help fertilize them. And she lays them in there and then he's the one that's pregnant with the developing baby seahorses. And he's the one that shoots them out of his little pouchy thing. He flexes his muscles and the babies shoot out. If you haven't seen a video of that, Google it, because baby seahorses are like that big and they look like little seahorses. But so the females compete with each other. The females do the headbutting. The females do the sort of like intimidating swim towards each other. And he doesn't do that. The females compete in order to do this, which is really interesting, right? And again, the gamete trade-off is the ancient one. His sperm is cheap and her eggs are expensive, relatively. But because the parental investment, the actual gestation is being done by him, they'll fight each other for that. So it's very cool when you have these like kind of exceptions that prove the rule. Will not stop today quite yet, but I think I'll tell you guys, yeah, I'll tell you something. So, cause we only have 1 minute. So when I was in college, when I was maybe a sophomore in college, I went to a Starbucks and they had their like animal fact of the day. And it was like, which one of these animals is a marsupial? And I am just like, I've always been, just so you know. And so I like walked into this place and I was like, it says like sea turtle, seahorse, panda, and whatever, giraffe. And I'm like, none of these animals are marsupials. And this coffee dude is like, no, it's a seahorse. And I'm like, oh, no, like they have a pouch, but like, he's like, yeah, man, they have a pouch. And I'm like, yeah, but it's not, they're not marsupials. They just like have their babies. And he goes, I don't know what to tell you, bro, look it up. And my girlfriend at the time, now wife, at that moment, it's like the only time this ever happened in our relationship. She like grabbed my arm, she's like, just don't. Because I was like, look it up. Like I was so like, so mad. There are marsupials, bro, look it up. Oh, they are not. Anyway, I'll see you guys on Thursday. Talk more about this stuff. I'm supposed to, but I don't.